Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the New South Wales Policy Professionals webinar series. I'm Louisa Manouni, and as host of the meeting today, I would like to acknowledge that we're on the lands of Aboriginal people and take the time to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people that are with us on the call today. We are joined by a number of our colleagues in the Premier's Department, and I'll introduce them first before passing over to them for the presentation, and there'll be time for questions at the end as well. So our feature topic today is the core New South Wales Public Service Work Policy, which focuses on the opportunities to build public sector capability and ensure that core work is undertaken by government sector employees. So this is a really great opportunity to learn a bit more about this policy, its development and its implementation in particular. We often focus on implementation as part of our work as policy professionals to make sure that the intended effects are realised and we get the full benefits of our policy work. We're also going to hear about the Expert Advisory Network, which is a great and new initiative connecting New South Wales government teams with in-house experts. So a good opportunity to consider the role of consultants and whether or not our colleagues within the broader sector can provide similar sources of expertise or even may even be more appropriate sources of expertise. So we'll hear on that as well. So to introduce our speakers, we have Mitchell Lee. Mitchell is a long-term seasoned HR leader with over 20 years experience spanning state and federal governments with a strong track record of driving strategic workforce transformation across education, transport, federal government sectors, and is now with the Premier's Department. Might just get everyone to pop themselves on mute if that is not already the case. So
yeah,
that was her.
I think everyone's been muted now. All right, can you all hear me? Great. And also more recently, Mitchell's been involved in organisational design, capability development, HR strategy, and is really passionate about the future of work and emerging workforce trends. Melinda is the Executive Director responsible in the Premier's Department for the Expert Advisory Network, and she joined the New South Wales Government in 2019 as the head of the Premier's Implementation Unit. In that role, her team oversaw the Premier's priorities, and more recently, she supported whole of government coordination for the Electricity Infrastructure Roadmap. Melinda formerly worked as an executive at St Vincent's Health Network and Qantas, and she spent a decade, well, that is a long time, in Boston Consulting Group, so you'll have some good views on where the strengths of consultants are. I just will now pass over to you. I did see that we have a few other people in the audience that you've invited along. So most welcome if you want to give a shout out to them, or we'll just introduce them when they pop in and say hello. I think Scott's on the line.
Hi everyone, thank you, Louisa.
This is Scott Peregrine Kelly. Now tell me again about your role. I think you have presented to our policy committee of practice before, Scott, so you were well known to me, but just for the benefit of others joining us for the first time today.
Yeah, thanks, Louisa. I'm the director of the Strategic Foresight team in the Cabinet Office, and our team started, I guess, a strategic project on rebuilding capabilities across the public sector and also reducing reliance on consultants and contingent labour. So we undertook a 9-month research project and developed some of the recommendations, and Mitch and Mel have very capably and effectively taken many of those recommendations forward.
Great. Well, we're going to get both sides then, the policy development and policy implementation. So that will be really great. I'll just hand over to Mitchell and Melinda now to commence their presentation, if that's okay.
Great, thanks, Louisa. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Louisa. I'm Mitchell Lee. I'm the Director for Strategic Workforce Development in Premier's Department. So my team sits within a workforce planning team that supports the whole of the public service. And I joined the team in January. I've come previously from Department of Education, and then prior to that transport, but I've always kind of been kicking around in state government, federal government for a little while. And I'm a HR professional by trade, and full disclosure, I'm not a policy person. So I'm much more of a understanding workforce, where is the workforce going, what do we need to do around our workforce, et cetera, et cetera. And policy obviously plays a part of that. And so I'll be honest, when I first joined and someone said, oh, there's a core work policy that you have to implement, I was like, what the hell is this thing? And how does it relate to my work? But actually now going through, there's some parts of this policy that are really directly impacting on workforce. And is actually really, hopefully, useful for workforce planners and HR people to manage the workforce and really build up that internal capability, as Scott mentioned. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the policy, but probably focus a little bit more on the implementation that we're going through at the moment. So Scott's around in the background. If anyone has any sort of targeted questions about how the policy itself was developed, maybe we'll whack them into the chat, and Scott can try and answer those. Or Scott, if you want to jump in at any point, happy to
Yep,
for you
happy to do both.
Lovely. Louise, do you have the presentation there?
That could be an issue.
Otherwise, I think I've got it on my side if you want me to share from my end.
Yeah, that would be great.
Lovely.
Good job.
Okay, so
Oh, you've just gone on mute for some reason.
there we go. Hopefully that's better. Look, I
Great.
wasn't prepared to run technology today, so lessons learned. All right, so the drivers for the core work policy. So in 2023, the Cabinet Office started some work around understanding the reliance on consultants and contingent labour, so as Scott mentioned. So where this is coming from is that limited capacity for the public service and public servants to deliver the core work of public service. So there was at the time extensive reliance on external workforces to be able to deliver that core work. And so what that means is that it's in the wording there, it's hollowing out the capability of the public sector. So really, there was some steps taken, or a report written to outline some steps taken to really build up that capability back into government. So part of that was looking at a core work policy, as well as establishment of the Executive Advisory Network, which Mel will talk about in a second. So we've gone through in April 2025, the government supported the implementation of the policy. And so then in July, we managed to get the full thing completed and implemented. I shouldn't say implemented, made official. So there was a whole of government circular that was sent out in July to put effect to the policy. And so I'll run you through a timeline later on in this slide deck too. So a little bit about the policy. So in essence, the policy is setting out the principles for how we resource core work. And you might be thinking, what the hell is core work? That's a very, very good question. And that's actually one of the things that the policy is covering. It doesn't actually, it describes some levels of what core work would be, but it also acknowledges that every agency is going to be different in the work that they do. And so it really puts the power in the agency, in the hands of the agency, to define what that is as core work. As you can imagine, it's going to be different for each agency. So there's some integrity considerations around how we define core work. And I guess it's a bit of a principles approach of what do we mean by core work. So it doesn't mean work that is essential. It's work that's, if you can imagine it, what would the community expect the work of that agency to be performing? And should that therefore be done by government sector employees as opposed to a consultant? So I've got some examples here. So it goes to heart of government decision making. So if we think about who are the decision makers, what decisions are they making on what types of work, and how does that then shape the public services that we support? So there's, sorry, I'm just moving things around here. There are some descriptions about work that must be done by government sector employees. So this is written into the policy at the moment. And so that's things like drafting legislation, developing cabinet submissions, managing grant programs, that sort of thing. So if any of that work is happening in agency already, the policy says that that must be done by government sector employees at the moment. So that's as of the date of the circular, there's a bit of a hard and fast rule of really agencies must be using in-house capabilities to be able to run those functions. There's then a separate part of the next stage of the policy that's talking about what work should be done by government sector employees. And so this is where it's going to be agency by agency. So agencies will think through what is their core work, how do they define what that core work is, and then that second part of the policy will say this parts of core work for that agency should be done by government sector employees. So this is where I think there's a bit of nuance, right? So we've got some hard and fast rules around what you're looking there on the screen, but then once you get into the next layer down, there's a lot of room for interpretation back through to agencies. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about how we're talking to agencies about how they define core work, how they understand what work is happening in the agencies, and particularly what we're trying to influence. So on the left-hand side there, you can see some stats around spend on consultants and spend on contingent labour. So this has come from our finance areas. There's not a direct correlation between these figures and the policy. So it's not saying that the policy is trying to drive down these numbers. So there's a distinction between how we define the core work. So what is the functions that are being performed by the agency, and then the spend. So the spend is a completely separate thing. So we're definitely not saying that we will never use consultants or contingent labour again. In fact, there's lots of areas where we would lean into using consultants to bring in external expertise, etc., etc. But really, we're looking at what is the core work functions and how do we protect that? The reason why we've got the contingent labour and the consultant spend is that this is a good way for agencies to have a look through those reports and start to think, we've spent in the past, we've spent money on these types of consultants or these types of contingent labour, and that may give you an indication as to how we define the core work. So you'd be able to go through and say, yes, that one seems okay, that aligns to the policy, so if we do that again, that's fine. But maybe these ones are the ones that we need to put some barriers around to change some behaviours. So we're having discussions at the moment about agency responsibilities. So the actions that are coming from the policy, how we're expecting agencies to implement the policy. So the first step is to prepare an action plan. So part of that action plan is first of all defining the core work for the agency, and then they need to set some targets around how do they reduce reliance on consultants and contingent labor, or how do they bring that work in-house, or how do they build up internal capabilities, whatever those targets are going to be based on where they're sitting at the moment. So if you can imagine an action plan that would say, for agency X, our core work is defined by these kinds of functions. Currently, our baseline says that we spend X amount of money or hours on contingent labor. And so therefore our target is going to be to reduce that by 20%, 50%, 100%. So that's what we're anticipating that would go into a plan. Part of the policy also requires agencies to monitor the use of external resources for core and non-core work. I'm assuming most agencies, at least the ones that I've spoken to, already do some level of monitoring of those resources, one way or another. There are some specifics in the policy about what aspects they're usually capabilities, etc., etc. There's probably some devil in the detail about how agencies will monitor. But that's an expectation of the policy, that it's over to agencies to make sure there's monitoring in place. One thing that have suggested is looking at procurement processes, to maybe put a flag or something like that into the process that will say, is this core work? So if you're going to engage a consultant through that process, you might be able to say either yes or no, this is core work. If it is, then you can put in some commentary as to why it's still going ahead. That will then also help our reporting. So agencies are required to report through to Cabinet. They're required to report in their annual reports their progress against the targets. And this is where Premier's Department is going to step in and help with some of this reporting as well. So they will send us through some of those reporting elements, how they're tracking against those targets, and then we'll wrap it up and send that out through to.
Mitchell, I think your connection is a little lumpy this morning. Hopefully we will get you back. Otherwise, we might need to see if Melinda can jump in and start presenting, and we'll come back to Mitchell.
Good morning. I can certainly do that. Let's see if I can share over the top of him.
Yes, I think it's going to come through.
Okay.
I think I'm back now, by the way. Sorry, I think my internet cut
out.
Do you want to, goodness.
Keep going?
You want to keep going, Mitch?
I'm just going to switch over to my phone.
Let me put the slides up for you. How about that?
Okay. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yep. And Melinda's jumped in with the slides, so I think that should be good.
Oh, that won't help, Melinda. Thanks.
Yeah. And sorry, Louise, how long do we have today?
Oh, we have till 11.
Yep. All right, excellent. Okay.
Nearly at the end, which is good. So Mel, do you want to go to the next slide for me?
So?
Yeah, lovely. So this is the timeline. So I was just in the middle of saying we have been running some information sessions for agencies to talk through what the policy is, their actions around the policy, and also the reporting requirements. So that's been happening in sort of July, August. And the expectation now is that agencies will start to draft their plans. We've put in a moderation step for October, November. So this is where agencies will send through their draft plans to us so that we can help moderate them. We're not anticipating that Premier's Department will change the plans or give any sort of say on it should be this or that, but more just that we can help through some comparisons. So if we can look at transport, education, DCS, we can see how do they all kind of roughly compare to each other, and it may support the agency to land on a final version of a plan. So that's a part of our implementation stage. Then all the plans should be fully done by December, and that's where our data collection will start for how they're tracking against the targets. Bill, if you want to go to the next slide for me. Just probably 2 points here. We've engaged quite strongly with our HR counterparts, so through our Chief People Officer forums, and it's through any kind of network we can through our human resources areas. We're also trying to engage our procurement teams as well to really build up that collective view of how do we implement this, basically so that HR people or procurement people can connect together to make sure that this thing gets implemented properly. We're also recommending making sure change management is front of mind for most agencies as well. So we wanted to make sure that was front and center. Thanks, Mel. Do you want to move to the next one? So in here, Louise, are you going to... Oh, actually, no, never mind. I'll talk through these in a second. So we've developed a range of support materials that will help them step through that action plan. In essence, it's the screenshot that you're seeing there is the start of our core work plan builder tool. It's built in Excel and it's really not anything super sophisticated, but it should just give agencies a bit of guidance around that's the type of information that we're looking for. It's not necessarily to say that's the thing that would be published through their annual reports, but it's really just a way to give them some guidance around the level of information that they're looking for. And probably just the other flag is that we're trying to reinforce is that this shouldn't be anything new for agencies. They've developed strategies and plans like this for lots of different types of things. So understanding the purpose, what's the outcome we're trying to achieve, and then what's the effective performance measures and activities that would go into that plan. So it should be a fairly straightforward strategy development process. Thanks, Mel. You want to go to the next one? So this is how the reporting and monitoring timeline will factor in. So the reports will be due in December. The action plans will be due in December. So by the time we do the reporting and then go back out to agencies to provide comments on how they're tracking, that should then feed into the ERC review and budget for April, that then flow back through to the budget decisions and then back into the review plans. So there should be quite a nice cycle there to try and tie it into an existing budget process as well. And Mel, I think I've got one last slide. Yes. So we have, to support agencies, we've got a hub created that has all of our resources on it. And there's a QR code that will take you through to that hub. This should be available to anyone who have a public sector email address, like a .gov.au email address. You may need to, the first time you access it, you may need a multi-factor authentication, but that should give you access. So you can go in there and have a look at everything that we've got. We've got some videos there of some of our information sessions. There's the plan builder that I mentioned before. There's copies of the policy and the circular and all that sort of stuff, as well as some of the FAQs that we're generating through some of those information sessions. So go in and have a look there if you're interested. And also, it's a living, breathing hub. We're trying to add to it as much as we can to support agencies through this. So if you have any wonderful ideas of things that would be useful in our hub, I'm very happy to hear that. I think that's probably it from me. if I saw there was probably one or two questions, but I'm happy to take questions at the end after.
Yes,
Mel
we
runs
will
through
take
her
questions
sections.
at the end. So I think we'll hear from both elements of this work, and then we'll have questions. But feel free to pop your questions in the chat, and so we're ready to go.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks everyone, nice to meet you. So Mel Sukhla, I'm the ED of the EAN, or Expert Advisory Network, in Premier's Department. And really here today, I guess, to share with you that this service is launched. We, a product really of the work that Scott and his colleagues did in the Cabinet Office back 12 or 18 months ago to say, why does the sector use consultants and other professional services, and where are the opportunities for us really to do more work in-house? And one of the key insights from Scott and his team's work was that there are pockets of teams across government who have the same sorts of skill sets, sometimes more finely tuned to government work, that we often look externally to find, but those teams either aren't very visible to the sector, or even if they are visible, they're not always easy to engage. And so the EAN is really looking to solve that problem. And in some instances, the EAN will be a really straightforward match. Someone reaches out to us, we say, yep, we've got a team that can do that work, and we'll connect them in. And in other times, the EAN really will be more about providing advice to help get a good scope of work prepared, for example, before we either make a match, or we encourage you or support you to go out to market. So we launched on the 31st of March, and I've been doing sector briefings since that time. I think we've covered off now almost all the ELTs of all agencies, and we're also going around speaking to Compracs and other sort of sector-based forums. So I think this will be the EAN in terms of thinking about how it interfaces with sort of policy and the types of work that you do. I think two key things. Often policy teams, I guess, are doing those tough thinking pieces of work, and there might be an opportunity in the work that you're doing to get support through the EAN. But secondly, policy folks are often, the cutting edge of what are the priorities of government, and what other parts of the sector are needing to do. So to the extent that you might be able to suggest the EAN as to another team is also something I guess we're keen to explore. Really important upfront. So our focus of the EAN is on delivering project work. So we're not about secondments, we're not about a mobility pool, we're not about that I need a particular skill set to drop into my team to join my team to deliver this. It's very much about replacing, I guess, that work that you would traditionally write a RFP for and go out to the market to find. You just heard all about core work. So we're definitely, EAN's about supporting core work, but we're also about supporting non-core work. So really anything that you would otherwise go out to the sector to procure, please consider the EAN as an alternative to that. So it can be core or non-core, it can be special, like highly specialized work, or it can be more generalist skills. It can be infrastructure, it can be for OPEX, it can be lots of different types of work. We haven't tried to delineate or focus. The other one that often catches people up is it can be any professional service pretty much. We're not in the space of legal work. That's a separate referral channels that are there, but really anything else. So whether it would be classified in the accounting system as a consultant or some other fee for service or professional service, we don't care if there's an internal team and we can make an introduction to that team to allow them to support you as opposed to going out to consultants, then we're here to do that. Just jumping down to the next slide. So really simple, what is the EAN and how does it work? So as I mentioned before, there's lots of teams across government that have skills that we think will be of interest to other parts of the sector. When we launched, we had 30 what we've called expert partner teams. We're now up to 45 or 46, I think. And they're a really cool mix actually of some very highly specialized and technical skills through to probably things that more generalist like business cases, customer and sort of stakeholder engagement and things like that. What the offer is of the EAN is that we are the front door. So these expert teams across government, some of them only service their own agencies at the moment. Some of them actually have quite sophisticated models. You may have interacted with them before. Teams often, actually a lot of them in DCS, like BIU and the DAC and things like that. They're already set up. Public Works is another one, already set up to take work from other parts of government. So the EAN is designed to be additive to that ecosystem that exists. So if you already know the team in government that you want to engage with to do a bit of work, you can keep going straight to them. If you know you need some help, but you don't know who to reach out to in government to see if there's a team that can help you, then we're the place you come. We're that front door, and our role is really to, I guess, build and maintain that network of partners, and facilitate effectively that matching. We also consider ourselves to have, and this is probably interesting from the policy sort of perspective as well, a more of a system stewardship role. So one of the hypotheses we have, and this is a brand new model that we're just proving now, is that it's quite hard in the current budget, in the way we budget and fund things, for the sector to optimise where it makes investments. So what we expect we're going to find is there'll be lots of demand for business cases sprinkled out throughout the sector. Not one of those teams is going to have the maybe the scale or the confidence in their own demand to resource a team. But when you read the core work policy, you'll see business cases are very much in that should do that work in-house. And so Premier's Department in hosting the EAN is really about giving government visibility of this demand across the sector so we can help inform those decisions about where there might be opportunities to invest in a team or a capability in one part of government so it can service the rest. As I mentioned, it's a new service. To the best of our knowledge, there's no equivalent service in other jurisdiction of government. Very much about try, test and learn at the moment, which is an exciting place to be. In terms of the sorts of services, this is a very long list. For anyone who's involved in procurement, it's based off the PMES procurement scheme, but really we have expert partners that can support across the range of services that are listed on these page, but often in a particular angle of those services. So we continue to build this list out. It's on our website. If you want to come back and revisit it, I'm not going to dwell on it now, but it's certainly pretty diverse. Let me just jump through there then and speak to what sort of support the EAN, those expert partner teams providing those services can provide. So in an ideal world, we want to help teams deliver projects. That's the third column on this page. So that's really where you need a team to come in and help you run a workshop. For example, there's a team that we can look to that can do that work. Bring them in, they get it done. You don't need to go out to market to bring a consultant in to help with that. That's what we call project delivery. But what we also acknowledge is none of the expert partner teams have been given additional resources to participate in the EAN at the moment in this first year. And so really the capacity of those project teams may be limited or will be limited in their ability to deliver projects. What they are happy to do, many of them in particular, I think will be their core offer in the first 12 to 18 months is as upfront advice. So already in the inquiries we've had where teams have reached out and said, I need some support, perhaps, doing this complex piece of work. The expert team we have maybe doesn't have the bandwidth to do this, provide the actual project support in the timeframes that's needed, but they're absolutely willing to sit down, talk through how they would approach it, help the client team get the right scope of a project, help them make sure they're asking the right questions, and with the aim of when they go out to market, they are what we've been calling a smarter buyer. So they're really buying what they need. Perhaps they're getting some advice on external parties that have done this sort of work before and done it to a high quality, etc. So upfront advice, I think, is going to be an area that we are able to deliver a lot of value to the sector for. The other couple of service models on this page, so project coaching and peer review, they're probably pretty self-explanatory, but just to unpack them a little bit, this coaching one is really around saying perhaps the expert partner team doesn't have the bandwidth or the appetite to step in and deliver the whole project, but they've got the tools and the templates and they're happy to guide your team through that work. And at the other end of the spectrum on the peer review, perhaps your team has done a piece of work, but you really want another team to look at it and stress test a little bit, or perhaps you've gone out to market and you want to do the same to make sure you're getting the best answer before you go and ask for a decision from government, for example. Quick one for us just on prioritisation and sort of making sure that EAN aligns with the strategic priorities of government. So this is something Minister Housos is the champion of this particular initiative, and what we hear consistently is just the interest in making sure the EAN and the expert partner teams that we have are really working on the government's priorities. And so anytime we get an inquiry come through the door, we're looking at it and asking ourselves a few questions, particularly around that area of, does this project support government's priorities? So saying things like, is this a request from Cabinet? Is this an election commitment? Is this some other commitment government's made? Is it an emerging issue that we know is currently being discussed and debated at Strategy Committee of Cabinet? And then connecting into the work that Mitch just presented, is this really core work of government? Is this the sort of work that we want government eyes and brains in and are working on in order to give us the best outcome? We ask a few other questions, obviously, about how good is the fit with the partners we have. Are they able to deliver the work? Is there a good scope, etc.? But that piece around the strategic alignment is really our core focus, and is also our ask as I coming back to as policy professionals, to the extent that you're seeing bits of work that need support that really would benefit from, I guess that internal to government support, then that absolutely the sorts of projects we want to work on. How it works, I think I'm nearly at the end too. So pretty straightforward. We have a website. If you have a project that needs support, it's as simple as jumping online and putting a few details into that website, and then our team, my team in Premier's department, will look at that, probably reach out, set up a quick conversation, and we aim to pretty quickly come back and say either that there is an EAN partner that might be able to support you, or there is an EAN partner but we know they've got a full book at the moment, or there's no partner. And from there, really, if there's a partner that we have in-house, then we make that connection to the partner, and you then work with that expert partner team to agree your project scope, agree the project cost, and then get on to delivering it. Just on the topic of cost, so there's no cost to use our service per se, but there is a cost. We've sort of set the EAN up on the basis of a full cost recovery model. That will mean different things to different teams, but it really means if you have a project, sort of that you're looking for support, come in with the expectation that you would be paying for the resources that you use. Obviously, they're often far cheaper than going out to market, though, in terms of paying for consultants' margins. I'm going to jump through procurement super quick and just say we've had questions on how does the EAN work within the procurement framework? Can I use them? What about my 3 quotes? How do I improve value for money? We've worked really closely with New South Wales Procurement. They're just about to publish some advice. The headline message is this is absolutely consistent with procurement policy. We should be, as a sector, looking to use internal resources before we go out to market. And what that means is that you can reach out to the EAN before you go to market. You can work with them really collaboratively to develop your scope, and then you can sort of effectively use common sense to make sure you're getting good value for money. Assess in the way any client would of, am I confident this team can do this work? Do these charge rates look appropriate, etc. So. That's really, I think, all I wanted to say today. This is just give a bit of an overview, I think, of what for us the launch looks like. As I said, we launched on the 31st of March. This year for us is really about proving the model and understanding where the demand in this sector is for support. We're due to go back to ERC at the end of this year to give a bit of an update. But what we are looking to is how do we help build the case, really, that evidence base, as I said before, to go to government to say, these are the opportunities we see for government to allocate resources so that we can do more work in-house. And really importantly, I think that the public sector is getting to do the work that is interesting and important to government, rather than seeing, the sexy fun projects go out to the consultants while we do the BAU hard grind stuff. And that's it for me. Louisa, I'll stop sharing and we can take any questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. I have so many questions, and I can see there's lots of questions in the chat as well. So if you have a question, please type it in the chat just so I know your topic, and hopefully can get some flow in the order of questions. But sometimes it's a bit hard, so apologies to Mel and Mitchell if we jump back and forward a bit. I think we'll start with a question from Larissa. Mel, you did probably cover some of this, but because it's such a significant issue, I think, for people thinking about using the Expert Advisory Network, I will ask Larissa to come on and ask a question. If you're able to do that, Larissa, that would be great. Turn your camera on and introduce yourself, which agency you're from, if that would be possible. If you're like, no way, I don't want to be on camera, then I'll ask it for you, but you're popped on, so excellent. Thank you.
All right, just flipping the laptop up. Look, I've worked for DQ at the moment, and I'm now in the delivery office over there, which sits under the office of the Deputy Secretary, but I've spent the last 7 or so years working in evaluation, which is a particular area that does get called out because we have to balance being independent as well as understanding the work we're doing. And I really noticed that we have really peaky demand for our work, so we often hire the minimum, and then we, get external people in to manage that extra demand. Changing to use the EAN is a great opportunity to bring skills in-house, but it would mean having spare capacity that we can share with others, and really depends on having that real coordination about the level of demand across government and risk appetite so that we can manage that hiring and not overbooking or underbooking that. So is there any consideration of what this would mean in that strategic level around things like swapping between OPEX and labour costs, which have historically been barriers to us having that staff? So really recognising, I think, those fundamental strategic and ways that we operate that have been a restriction to this kind of thing. It's a great initiative, and just wanting to make sure it's successful, I think.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I probably should say up front, not going in rose-coloured glasses with this. I think there's a lot of cultural, a lot of rational reasons for the way people are set up today, effectively. And I suspect we will never completely displace consultants, because that peaks in demand. Absolutely. That's actually where consultants or some other labour hire are sensible and efficient use of resources. I guess what the EAN aims to do, though, is share, or to the extent that we can, that capacity across the sector, so that if teams who have capacity, because they're in a trough rather than a peak at the moment, can actually take on work from other parts of government. And that does lead us to think, yes, over time, there should be, and this is about the evidence base for us, being able to collect and show there's this volume of evaluations, for example. And evaluations are a great one because they are in the should list of core work. And often they are something that you do need an arm's length, but you don't necessarily need an arm's length from government. You just need an arm's length from perhaps that internal team. So a great one where teams might be able to do work across the sector and load share and get those benefits. So there is that opportunity. We have on LEC and OPEX just starting to scratch the surface of to what extent is that a real barrier, because we hear from some people it really is, and we hear from others that it shouldn't be. But I think that's where, for us at the moment, our focus is really trying to get some volume through the EAN, right? So as soon as we can get the data to put to government to say, and it won't just be from the EAN inquiries, it'll be looking at where we've spent money externally as well, but some data to put to government to say, we can see there's interest and appetite from the sector to use the EAN for evaluation. We've got 3 or 4 great evaluation teams already part of the network, but they can only do 1 or 2, extra projects per year with their current capacity. And how do we unlock that? And I would just say there's some teams that have already tackled that question. So there are a few teams that work with have basically budget envelopes that give them the flex to be able to say, we're going to take a bet basically, and we're confident that we can bring work in terms of from other parts of government to fund basically what's our budget gap between the resources we carry on our books and the budget we get from con funds. So where we can support the sector to think about that, we certainly will, but there's lots of work to do.
Thanks. And I can see Scott's popped in, so that maybe he wants to continue.
Yeah, just really shortly, I think it's a great question. I think kind of what Mel's pointing to is there's a mix of hard and fast rules, sometimes accounting rules that are inherent barriers, and then there's just cultural practice. And particularly Mitch will know this, like in the mobility space, there's actually a lot of flexibility for people to move around the sector in the GSE Act. But we just culturally don't practice that. So making that distinction between why do we culturally behave in a particular way versus what are the finance or accounting rules that prevent us from doing some of this, and distinguishing the difference is a key kind of thing there.
Thanks. We're going to move to couple of questions on scope. Our first one is a question from Nicole. Nicole, would you like to jump on about frontline services?
Thanks, Louisa. Yeah, so I guess I'm interested around frontline service delivery, and I noted early in the presentation there was the piece about what would community expect agency to perform as opposed to the private sector, and I feel like our own government over the years has been part of potentially shifting expectations about what government versus private sector perform in the corrective services space, in the child protection spaces that I'm more familiar with. So I guess my question is a simple one. I'm just checking for understanding that consideration around those sort of core frontline services is part of this work, that they're in scope. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. And Scott, maybe you can pitch into this one as well. So there's a few considerations. I think in the definitions of the policy, it's particularly for government sector employees, so employees employed under the GSC Act. So I know from my perspective, because I used to work in education, that takes out teachers. I'd also probably say, as Premier's Department, we've been walking a very fine line about not giving advice on what's specifically in and out for an agency, because that'll be determined by the agency. So there may be situations where an agency wants to include more stuff into their action plans, because they want to take greater action. But yeah, so I don't want to give you any direct saying yes, this is in or this is out. There are some nuances around frontline though. So frontline in general, and this, Scott, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. In general, frontline workers would be excluded from the policy unless they're under the GSC Act. Is that right, Scott? Is that your understanding?
Yeah, it's correct. And just taking us back to the origin story of the election commitments around reducing expenditure for consultants and non-frontline contingent labour. So there was no downward expenditure pressure put on frontline contingent labour roles. Therefore, that's why they're tended not to feature as part of some of these policies.
Thank you. That's great.
It is an interesting question, I think, though, that probably perhaps not under this policy, but may need some further thinking in the future, particularly in strategic commissioning of services, which we have seen across the world, but in New South Wales to perhaps a more limited extent in terms of the role of the private sector in corrective services. And also, we could broaden that out to the role of the government funding the private school sector as well. So I won't put you on the spot to answer that question, because I think it's probably a big one for governments to grapple with going forward. But I wanted to go back to just a question for Mitchell that I was considering when hearing from you. I think, and I wanted to kind of put this in the context of policy development, but it's a really key thing, I think, that we often skip in policy development, or we either have so much embedded knowledge that we intrinsically understand it. But if we're doing policy development, and we need to be able to think about, is it implementable? Is the capability and capacity there within the sector for the policy to be able to, have the effect that we think about? So I wondered, Mitchell, I know you don't consider yourself a policy person, but clearly, but we consider you a policy person because you are thinking about implementation of policy. So therefore, welcome to the club. But what are the things that you think we should be thinking about? Okay, we've got a new policy, government's kind of signal this direction, we're developing a policy options paper, for example. What are some of the factors that you think we should be considering in working out whether capability and capacity is there to deliver the policy?
See, very good question. So there's probably two elements to this. One is the capability and capacity to actually do the implementation, and then there's probably the separate question about capability and capacity to perform the core work under the policy, which goes to a little bit of what we were just talking about with EAN capacity. I'll just probably talk a little bit about the first section first, around how we're who's doing the implementation, who are we engaging with. It's very different agency by agency. So some of the smaller agencies, it's really not a massive deal for them because they're small. A lot of them don't use a lot of consultants already or contingent labor already, and so the policy will come in and they might need to tweak a few things, but otherwise it's fairly straightforward. It's probably in the larger agencies that are finding this a little bit more challenging. So as you can imagine, somewhere like transport, they have mass amounts of contingent labor and consultant spend, and just trying to work through, like, just even trying to get data on that is really challenging sometimes. So what we've done is, in order to make sure it was on the radar, first of all, there's, with these types of things, it's an awareness process. So we had lots of meetings very early on in sort of March, April, to try and get it on the radar with CPOs and senior leadership. And this is why in some of our information sessions, it's like, build your coalition now, get your working group together now. And so it's good. I think we've been working quite closely with transport, education, and health, and a few others around what's their process to get this thing over the line. So I think that capacity to implement is going to be different for everybody, and some of them are struggling. I'll put it out there, because it's a very difficult ask, to particularly around the reporting and monitoring. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible.
Thanks.
I think the other question around capacity to in-house is another one that we're sort of working through. I think each agency is going to have to tackle that individually. I will say, though, most agencies have been trying to do this for a while, not because of core work, but they're trying to reduce the reliance on contingent labor consultant spend, and they have been taking action for a while. And so I know, this is anecdotal, by the way, don't quote me on it, but I spoke to someone at Transport the other day that says they've got processes in place for anything over 30,000 has to go through quite a senior approvals process, which wasn't the case before. And I know with education, they're every month, I think they're reporting on their contingent labor and consultant spend, not just core work, but the full shebang. So I think agencies have been working on this for a little while.
Thanks. Next question is from Julian. Are you there on the line?
Yep, I'm on the line. Thank you. Thank you, Louisa, Mitchell, and Melinda. Just very quick question in relation to just a bit out of left field, really, in the sense that we are quite aware that a lot of consultants, they learn their craft from actually being public servants to begin with. And just sort of wondering, like, as a lot of those expertise sort of like bleed out into like the private sector, whether there's been any sort of thinking in terms of attracting sort of those talent back into the public sector fold. Just sort of wondering whether, it's something that is realistic to bring people with that expertise who build their core expertise in the public sector to come back into the fold. I sort of understand that probably it is, EAN is probably trying to do like a stopgap sort of measure to fill some of those, some of that void. But yeah, just interested to hear from you as to whether there's been some sort of thinking in terms of attracting these, so-called experts back into the fold. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't think I'd position the EAN as a stopgap. Like, I think the EAN is actually a quite strategic, different way of trying to service the sector's need, where there's not the scale, I guess, of that expertise needed in a single agency. Because so often what will happen is that where something is, the repeatable work that an agency does all the time, they build and invest in building that capability up. So the EAN sweet spot's going to be working on projects and types of work that don't typically I guess have a high base load in every agency. That means that team should be stood up all the time. That's not quite your question, I realise that, but I just think it's the Australian Government Consulting, which is a completely different model, but their pitch is rare and repeatable, which I think is a really interesting and probably the similarity for New South Wales to work in, which is they want to work on projects that are rare for that agency or that team to do, but repeatable in terms of the skill set is valued across the sector to do multiple times. On the question of bringing consultants back into the public sector, I don't think I can answer that. If I think across the breadth of teams that we have in the EAN, maybe for some teams that really is the case. Maybe there'll be the behavioural insights unit, for example, through this process. Maybe they are able to do more projects, therefore their team needs to grow, and therefore they look at the consultant market to bring those skill sets in. So that might be, but I suspect there'll be other expert teams that see their value as being that they are in the public sector now and or they can grow more. So they're sort of, there's obviously things like market rates, consultants earn much more, they work, like the value proposition for people is different. So I guess I don't know if when you go through those business lines that we have of services, whether or not it would be up to each expert team to say if I've got a mandate to increase the size of my team now because there's work coming through the EAN, is the best way to do that to bring the consultants to go and recruit consultants, or is it actually to train up more of my own?
Just to add in, I know there's quite a number of initiatives at the moment, particularly around, I want to say converting, but it's not a policy, it's not converting, but moving people from contingent labour into ongoing employee roles, obviously through normal recruitment processes. But because there's the push to reduce contingent labour, so business areas and agencies are making those calls now to say, okay, so we're not going to continue on with your contingent labour contract. Instead, we're going to open up an ongoing position, and a lot of people are finding that as an attractive option. So we're hoping that that's going to start pulling people in-house.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
I have had the experience that we have been able to attract consultants back in to work for government because they value the variety of work, they value the public service commitment, and they value the teams that they love working with the teams that are within government. So I think there is some potential there, but obviously the dollar factor requires people to think about that personally. I'm really sorry. We've had so many questions from the chat today, and I think we've only touched on a small handful. Apologies to Alice who we didn't get time for, but I know that there's been a few responses already in the chat, so that's great. I wanted to thank our presenters, Mitchell, Scott and Melinda, for your time today, and to our audience for their interest and enthusiasm in policy. We have our next session lined up in September. We're going to be hearing from Anthony Lean, who's the Secretary of the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water. So that'll be great coming up in the next month. So take a look out for that one. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Louisa.
Thank you.